Chapter 13. What Are We? The orchard was quieter the morning after the lantern walk. The dew sparkled on grass still flattened from last night's visitors, and apple blossoms drifted down in the gentle breeze like confetti from a dream that refused to fade. The sky stretched endless blue above, promising perfect weather for the festival's opening day. Charlie stood by the white gazebo, phone in hand, staring at the text from Claire. She'd read it so many times that the words had begun to lose meaning. Need confirmation. ASAP. Monday. 10 a.m. Pitch. New York expansion team wants you. Career-defining opportunity. It should have made her heart leap. 6 months ago, it would have sent her dancing around her Chicago apartment, calling friends for celebratory drinks. It was everything she'd worked toward. Recognition, advancement, the chance to leave her mark on something bigger than herself. Instead, it made her feel hollow, like a bell without a clapper. She slipped the phone into her pocket as Mayor Liz approached, clipboard in hand and a harried smile on her face. There you are. The apple cider donuts just arrived, and Missy needs to know where to set up. The original booth is a little too close to the children's face painting, and we can't have sticky fingers near fresh paint. Charlie nodded, grateful for the distraction. I'll help her move to the spot near the maple tree. More shade there anyway. She spent the day in a haze of festival preparations, weaving between vendor tents and schedules, answering questions about parking and electricity hookups. But the weight of her pending decision sat heavy on her shoulders, and the question echoed louder with each passing hour. What are we now? Ethan was nearby all day, helping volunteers set up the dance floor, securing loose boards on benches, directing the sound system technicians. But he didn't ask about the text, didn't press, didn't pry. And that somehow hurt more than any confrontation would have. She watched him from a distance, how he smiled at the older women arranging their pie displays, how he lifted Gracie onto his shoulders to hang more paper blossoms from low-hanging branches. His laughter carried across the grounds, but whenever their eyes met, something guarded slipped back into place. Once, just once, he said her name across the crowd. Charlie? And it sounded like a memory he hadn't dared to speak aloud in years, like a prayer and a warning in one breath. He wasn't begging her to stay, because he wanted her to choose on her own. The realization stung like antiseptic on an open wound, necessary but painful. What had she expected? That he would demand she turn down the opportunity, that he would make her choose between worlds? That afternoon, as Charlie adjusted the sound equipment for tomorrow's opening ceremony, Gracie appeared at her side, clutching something behind her back. I drew something for you, she said, rocking on her heels with barely contained excitement. Charlie knelt to her level. Did you now? Gracie nodded solemnly before presenting her creation with a flourish. Ta-da! It was a crayon sketch, Gracie in the center, smiling wide with her crown of fairy lights, perched atop wild curls, standing between Charlie and Ethan beneath an apple tree heavy with fruit. A house stood behind them, a large red heart on the door. The words at the top, written in careful block letters, read, My family. Charlie's throat tightened, emotion washing over her in an unexpected wave. Is that me? She asked softly, pointing to the figure with long brown hair. Gracie nodded, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Of course. You live in my house now. Charlie blinked fast, willing the tears not to fall. That's very official. Gracie grinned, revealing the gap where her front tooth had recently fallen out. I made it official, just so you know. Charlie hugged her, the drawing pressed between them like a fragile promise. Over Gracie's shoulder, she caught sight of Ethan watching them from across the festival grounds. He looked like a man who'd already grieved something he still hoped to keep. When she pulled back, Gracie was looking at her with surprising perception. Are you sad? No, honey, Charlie said, smoothing the little girl's curls. Just thinking about some grown-up stuff. Is it about the phone call? Charlie stilled. What phone call? The one that made you look worried. Uncle E said sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. Of course he would explain it that way, without pressure, without judgment. Just the simple truth that choices sometimes hurt. He's right about that, Charlie said. But don't worry, everything's going to work out just fine. Gracie studied her face for a moment longer, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Can I help with the streamers now? Absolutely. Max needs someone with an artistic eye over by the entrance. As Gracie skipped away, Charlie carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into her pocket, the weight of it somehow heavier than the phone that sat beside it. Her fingers lingered on the creased paper, remembering how just yesterday she and Ethan had stood beneath lanterns, lips meeting in a kiss that hadn't felt like fireworks. It had been gravity, real, rooted, permanent, and still she was spinning again. At lunch, Charlie escaped the bustle of the festival grounds and retreated to the quiet of Mabel's front porch. She sat on the wooden swing, reviewing her festival notes and trying to ignore the deadline looming in her inbox. Her phone buzzed, rattling against the wooden slats. This time it wasn't a text. It was a call. Marcus. She stared at the screen, unsure whether to answer. She hadn't spoken to him since their breakup, since he'd chosen a partnership over their relationship. What could he possibly want now? Against her better judgment, she swiped to answer. Hello? Charlie, his voice came through, smooth and familiar as aged whiskey. I was hoping I'd catch you. Marcus, this is unexpected. I just saw the pitch invite come through the firm email. You're on the shortlist for the New York expansion, executive-level design director. She said nothing, unsure how he even knew about the opportunity. Look, I know things ended messily between us, he continued, his voice taking on that persuasive tone she once found charming. But this is what you've worked for. Don't waste it on some temporary sabbatical. Claire says you're in some small town playing festival organizer. Behind her, the porch floorboards creaked. She turned and saw Ethan standing in the doorway, a plate with a sandwich in one hand, frozen mid-step. His face was carefully blank, but his eyes held a world of hurt. He didn't say a word, just turned around and walked away, the screen door closing softly behind him. Marcus, I have to go, Charlie said abruptly. Wait, Charlie, this could be everything we talked about. Your name on the door, eventually. The Parker account alone would... She hung up without another word, heart hammering against her ribs. Ethan had heard enough. Too much. Not the context, not her reluctance, just Marcus's voice and the mention of New York. She rushed inside, but Ethan was already gone, the back door swinging slightly in his wake. Through the kitchen window, she saw him striding across the yard, shoulders set in a rigid line. The rest of the day passed like a storm cloud overhead, dark and heavy with the promise of rain that never quite fell. Ethan stayed distant, cordial when they crossed paths, helpful with festival tasks, but gone in the ways that mattered most. The light behind his eyes had dimmed, replaced by that careful neutrality she was beginning to hate. Charlie hated it. Hated the walls between them, hated that she didn't know how to break through them, hated that one phone call could unravel everything they'd built, but she also didn't know how to fix it without making promises she wasn't sure she could keep. By late afternoon, the festival grounds were transformed. Booths lined the paths, string lights waited to be illuminated at dusk, and the stage stood ready for tomorrow's performances. Charlie checked off the final items on her list, a hollow sense of accomplishment settling in her chest. It looks wonderful, Mayor Liz said, appearing beside her. You've done something special here, Charlie. Thank you, Charlie replied, mustering a smile. It was a team effort. Some things are, Liz agreed, her wise eyes studying Charlie's face. But the hardest work is usually the kind we do alone. Before Charlie could respond, Liz patted her arm and moved on to greet other volunteers, leaving Charlie with the distinct feeling that the mayor hadn't been talking about festival planning at all. That evening, desperate for quiet and perspective, Charlie walked down to the quilting circle held every Thursday in the back room of the First Baptist Church. She'd heard about it from Mabel, a tradition older than most of the buildings in town. The room smelled like lavender sachets and old wood, and the women gathered around the large quilting frame welcomed her with warm smiles and hands full of colourful fabric. No questions, no pressure, just the peaceful rhythm of needles dipping in and out of cotton batting. Ruth Grafton handed her a square of sky-blue fabric and a needle already threaded with silver. "Just follow the pattern, dear. Nothing to it." Charlie stitched silently for half an hour, finding unexpected peace in the repetitive motion and the gentle hum of conversation around her. Stories of grandchildren and garden yields, of arthritis remedies and church fundraisers, the timeless soundtrack of small-town life. Finally, when the silence inside her grew too loud, she spoke. "I don't know if I belong here." Miss Grafton, who'd been quilting for 60 years and whose hands moved with the confidence of someone who had sewn her way through wars and weddings, didn't even look up from her work. "Belonging's not about geography, child. It's about choosing where to plant yourself." Mabel, sitting beside Charlie, added softly, "You can chase shiny things forever, sugar. Or you can choose what actually matters." "But what if what matters is both?" Charlie asked, her voice small. "What if I want roots and wings?" "Then you find a way to have them," said Ellie Thompson, the youngest of the quilters at 62. "But remember, a tree with shallow roots gets blown over in the first storm." At lunch, Charlie escaped the bustle of the festival grounds and retreated to the quiet of Mabel's front porch. She sat on the wooden swing, reviewing her festival notes and trying to ignore the deadline looming in her inbox. Her phone buzzed, rattling against the wooden slats. This time it wasn't a text. It was a call. "Marcus." She stared at the screen, unsure whether to answer. She hadn't spoken to him since their breakup, since he'd chosen a partnership over their relationship. What could he possibly want now? Against her better judgment, she swiped to answer. "Hello?" "Charlie," his voice came through, smooth and familiar as aged whiskey. "I was hoping I'd catch you. Marcus, this is unexpected. I just saw the pitch invite come through the firm email. You're on the shortlist for the New York expansion, executive-level design director." She said nothing, unsure how he even knew about the opportunity. "Look, I know things ended messily between us," he continued, his voice taking on that persuasive tone she once found charming. "But this is what you've worked for. Don't waste it on some temporary sabbatical. Claire says you're in some small town playing festival organizer." Behind her, the porch floorboards creaked. She turned and saw Ethan standing in the doorway, a plate with a sandwich in one hand, frozen mid-step. His face was carefully blank, but his eyes held a world of hurt. He didn't say a word, just turned around and walked away, the screen door closing softly behind him. "Marcus, I have to go," Charlie said abruptly. "Wait, Charlie, this could be everything we talked about. Your name on the door, eventually. The Parker account alone would—" She hung up without another word, heart hammering against her ribs. Ethan had heard enough. Too much. Not the context, not her reluctance, just Marcus's voice and the mention of New York. She rushed inside, but Ethan was already gone, the back door swinging slightly in his wake. Through the kitchen window, she saw him striding across the yard, shoulders set in a rigid line. The rest of the day passed like a storm cloud overhead, dark and heavy with the promise of rain that never quite fell. Ethan stayed distant, cordial when they crossed paths, helpful with festival tasks, but gone in the ways that mattered most. The light behind his eyes had dimmed, replaced by that careful neutrality she was beginning to hate. Charlie hated it. Hated the walls between them, hated that she didn't know how to break through them, hated that one phone call could unravel everything they'd built, but she also didn't know how to fix it without making promises she wasn't sure she could keep. By late afternoon, the festival grounds were transformed. Booths lined the paths, string lights waited to be illuminated at dusk, and the stage stood ready for tomorrow's performances. Charlie checked off the final items on her list, a hollow sense of accomplishment settling in her chest. "It looks wonderful," Mayor Liz said, appearing beside her. "You've done something special here, Charlie." "Thank you," Charlie replied, mustering a smile. It was a team effort. Some things are, Liz agreed, her wise eyes studying Charlie's face. But the hardest work is usually the kind we do alone. Before Charlie could respond, Liz patted her arm and moved on to greet other volunteers, leaving Charlie with the distinct feeling that the mayor hadn't been talking about festival planning at all. That evening, desperate for quiet and perspective, Charlie walked down to the quilting circle held every Thursday in the back room of the First Baptist Church. She'd heard about it from Mabel, a tradition older than most of the buildings in town. The rooms smelled like lavender sachets and old wood, and the women gathered around the large quilting frame welcomed her with warm smiles and hands full of colourful fabric. No questions, no pressure, just the peaceful rhythm of needles dipping in and out of cotton batting. Ruth Grafton handed her a square of sky-blue fabric and a needle already threaded with silver. Just follow the pattern, dear. Nothing to it. Charlie stitched silently for half an hour, finding unexpected peace in the repetitive motion and the gentle hum of conversation around her. Stories of grandchildren and garden yields, of arthritis remedies and church fundraisers, the timeless soundtrack of small-town life. Finally, when the silence inside her grew too loud, she spoke. I don't know if I belong here. Miss Grafton, who'd been quilting for 60 years and whose hands moved with the confidence of someone who had sewn her way through wars and weddings, didn't even look up from her work. Belonging's not about geography, child. It's about choosing where to plant yourself. Mabel, sitting beside Charlie, added softly, You can chase shiny things forever, sugar. Or you can choose what actually matters. But what if what matters is both? Charlie asked, her voice small. What if I want roots and wings? Then you find a way to have them, said Ellie Thompson, the youngest of the quilters at 62. But remember, a tree with shallow roots gets blown over in the first storm. Charlie stared at the fabric in her hands, a heart-shaped patch she'd been stitching onto the square of sky-blue cotton. Her stitches were uneven, amateur compared to the precise work of the women around her. But they were holding. She didn't finish it. Instead, she thanked the women, carefully set her work aside, and left. The orchard was bathed in twilight when Charlie arrived, the first stars just beginning to appear above the trees. The festival grounds were quiet now, vendors and volunteers gone home to rest before tomorrow's grand opening. She found Ethan exactly where she knew he would be, beneath the old tree swing where they'd kissed, where their initials were carved into ageless bark. He looked up as she approached, but didn't rise from where he sat, on an old wooden bench. The set of his jaw told her everything about his mood. Why didn't you say something? She asked without preamble. He kept his eyes on the grass. Because it's not my choice to make. If you stay, I want it to be because you want to, not because I asked. She stepped closer, frustration bubbling beneath her skin. But I needed to know you cared. I do. His voice cracked slightly on the words. I thought I made that clear last night, but I don't want to beg someone to choose me again. I can't. The reference to his ex, to the woman who had walked away from him, and Gracie hung between them like smoke. Charlie folded her arms, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. And I can't be the only one fighting for this. They stood in silence, anger curling into hurt into something deeper and more painful. You still want the city, he said quietly, a statement rather than a question. I want to matter, she replied, the words rushing out before she could stop them. I want a life that feels like mine. I spent years building something, Ethan. I can't just throw it away. And you think you won't find that here? His eyes finally met hers, a challenge in their depths. I don't know. The emotion spilled between them like shattered glass. That's what I'm trying to figure out, whether I can be both the person who builds beautiful spaces in the world and the person who belongs somewhere. You belong here, he said so softly she almost missed it. You always have. Then why does it feel like you're already saying goodbye? Ethan stood then, closing the distance between them. Because I'm trying to protect myself. To protect Gracie. I watched her draw you into our family today, and all I could think was what happens when you leave again. I haven't decided anything yet, Charlie said, her voice trembling. But you're already acting like I'm gone. Because it's easier than watching you pack. The raw honesty of his words struck her like a physical blow. For a moment neither spoke, the weight of fear and longing too heavy for words. Finally, Charlie turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. I need space, Ethan. To think. To figure out what I really want. She almost turned back. Almost asked him to stop her, but space was all she had left to give that wouldn't feel like surrender. Her feet carried her forward even as her heart strained toward him. He didn't stop her, and she didn't look back as she walked away, even when the first tear slid down her cheek. Behind her, the swing creaked gently in the evening breeze, a hollow sound in the gathering dark. Chapter 14. The Proposal. Not that one. The morning sun spilled gold across Main Street, casting a soft glow over the shop fronts and freshly swept sidewalks. Charlie walked toward the town square with her clipboard in hand, her mind fogged by the weight of the previous night's fight. She'd barely slept, rehearsing all the things she should have said differently, all the ways she could have bridged the gap between them instead of widening it. The silence between her and Ethan had grown louder overnight, and no amount of busy work could silence the ache pressing against her ribs. She'd left 3 festival checklists half-finished on Mabel's kitchen table and had forgotten her coffee altogether, something that hadn't happened since her first all-nighter in design school. She rounded the corner toward the town square and stopped dead in her tracks. Paper banners in hand-painted lettering lined every available surface, dozens of them. Hanging from trees, wrapped around lampposts, strung across storefronts. Some were elaborate with painted apple blossoms. Others were simple white poster board with careful block letters. All of them read some version of, "Thank you, Charlie. Sweetbriar loves you. You belong here. Our festival hero." Charlie covered her mouth, heart lodging in her throat. Missy emerged from the cafe holding a tray of muffins, her smile warm and knowing. Surprise. Charlie turned in a slow circle, blinking fast against the sting of tears. She'd always thought success would feel like applause in a boardroom, like seeing her name on the door of a corner office. But this, grateful eyes, sticky-fingered cards, a community gathered not for what she could achieve, but for who she was. This felt like the kind of success that lived in the marrow, that couldn't be framed or measured in quarterly reports. "We thought you should know," Missy continued, setting the tray down on a nearby bench, "just in case you forgot that you've already made this place better." One by one, townsfolk appeared from storefronts and side streets, carrying more banners, pie tins, flowers, handmade cards from the 3rd grade class. Mayor Liz stood beaming next to the courthouse steps. The quilting circle ladies waved from their usual bench. Even cranky old Mr. Halverston waved from his scooter, a grudging smile beneath his bristly moustache. "You put us back on the map," said Roy from the hardware store. "My cousin from 3 counties over is coming for the first time in 15 years. "My booth already sold out of reservation tickets," Missy added. "We haven't had a waiting list since 1992. Charlie could only nod, tears slipping freely down her cheeks now. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, dear," Ruth Grafton said, patting her arm. "You just have to know that you matter here." But the true surprise came bounding across the grass. Gracie, her curls flying behind her, holding a glittery envelope and wearing a grin as wide as the orchard. "Open it," she cried, thrusting it into Charlie's hands. "I made it all by myself, except for the spelling parts." Inside was a certificate bordered with crayon hearts and sparkly stickers. "Official aunt application, signed Gracie Walker." At the bottom was a note in careful script, clearly written by an adult hand but traced over by Gracie's own. "Will you be my forever aunt? Yes. No." Charlie knelt down on the cobblestone, eye level with Gracie, her vision blurring. "Gracie?" The girl blinked up at her, suddenly solemn. "You already are. But I wanted to ask, like grown-ups do, when they want forever." Charlie laughed through the tears, her heart so full it physically ached. "Yes. 1,000,000 times yes. Gracie launched herself into Charlie's arms, nearly knocking her backward. They hugged tightly. Gracie's small arms wound around Charlie's neck, and for a moment nothing else mattered. Not New York, not careers, not even the hurt from last night. Just this small, fierce love that had somehow become the center of her world. "I knew you'd say yes," Gracie whispered against her hair. "Uncle E was worried, but I told him not to be silly." Charlie pulled back slightly, searching Gracie's face. "Your uncle knows about this." Gracie nodded solemnly. "He helped me with the envelope, and he said I should ask you myself because it's between us, like a grown-up talk." Charlie's heart stuttered, even after their fight, even with the wall between them. Ethan had helped Gracie with this, had encouraged her to forge her own connection with Charlie. The realization washed over her like warm water, melting something rigid inside her chest. "Where is he?" Charlie asked softly. "Getting the festival lights fixed," Gracie replied. "He said the big ones by the stage weren't working right." Charlie nodded, helping Gracie straighten her slightly rumpled shirt. "I think I need to go check on that. Want to come with me?" Gracie's face lit up. "Yes, and I need to practice my song for tonight. Will you help me?" "Nothing I'd rather do," Charlie said, finding that she meant it completely. The afternoon sun slanted golden through the trees as Charlie found herself helping set up the stage for the festival's talent show. Her hands moved automatically, checking wires, adjusting curtains, hanging string lights, while her heart tried to stitch itself back together. Each small task felt like placing another piece back where it belonged. She didn't expect Ethan to show up, not after how they'd left things. But he did. He walked up quietly, toolbox in hand, and, without a word, began hammering in the loose stage steps beside her. His shoulders were still tense, but something in his posture had softened since last night. They didn't speak for a long time. Charlie handed him nails when he needed them. He steadied the ladder when she climbed up to adjust the lights. She passed him the right size wrench without being asked. He caught a falling prop before it hit the ground. They worked in perfect rhythm, and somehow it said everything that words couldn't. "The town did something nice this morning," Charlie said finally, voice soft as she coiled a length of extension cord. "For me?" Ethan nodded, eyes on the board he was securing. "I know, Mabel told me. And Gracie gave me something." When they pulled apart, foreheads still touching, Charlie saw Gracie watching them from the stage, hands clasped beneath her chin in exaggerated delight. Behind her, Mabel and Ruth exchanged knowing smiles. "We have an audience," Charlie murmured, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "We always did," Ethan replied with a soft laugh. "This whole town's been waiting for us to figure it out." Later, as lanterns twinkled overhead and laughter rang from the rehearsal crowd beginning to disperse, Charlie and Ethan sat on the edge of the stage, legs swinging over the side. Gracie had gone with Mabel to help serve hot chocolate to the volunteers, leaving them in a rare moment of privacy. "I still have the pitch on Monday," Charlie said softly, knowing they couldn't avoid reality forever. Ethan nodded, his shoulder warm against hers. "I know. I've worked for this opportunity for years. I know that too." She turned to look at him, needing to see his face. "But I also have something here I never expected to find again." He met her gaze, steady and clear. "What's that?" "A place where I matter. Not for what I produce or achieve, but just for being me." She took a deep breath. "And people I love." His eyes softened at the word, but he didn't look away. "After the festival," she said, the words feeling like stepping stones across uncertain water. "Let's figure this out. Together. I don't know what the answer is yet, but I want to find it with you." Ethan smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and erased the worry lines from his forehead. "I'm in." He laced his fingers through hers, and under the hum of string lights and the scent of apple blossoms they made a silent vow. This time, they were choosing each other. For good. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but for the first time, Charlie felt certain they would walk it together. Chapter 15. the Apple Blossom Festival. The sun rose warm and gold over Sweetbriar Ridge, casting honey-coloured beams across the orchard where the Apple Blossom Festival was already coming to life. Dew sparkled on grass still flattened from yesterday's preparations, and the air carried the mingled scents of cinnamon, fresh sawdust, and the sweet perfume of apple blossoms. Charlie stood in front of the mirror in Mabel's bedroom, fingers brushing the fabric of a soft floral sundress. It had once belonged to her mother, a fact that made her heart catch every time she smoothed her hands over the delicate pattern. Mabel had hemmed it shorter, added embroidered vines along the seams, and tucked it away in a cedar chest until now. It fit like it had been waiting for her all along. Like slipping into a memory, Charlie whispered to herself. Turning slightly to see how the morning light caught the fabric, Mabel peeked in from the doorway, her eyes already misty. "You look like Sweetbriar herself, Sugar." She stepped into the room, adjusting a loose strand of Charlie's hair. "Your mama wore that dress to the very first festival she organised. Seems fitting you should wear it today." Charlie turned, smoothing her hands nervously along the skirt. "You think it's too much? Too sentimental?" "I think it's just right," Mabel squeezed her shoulder. "Some things come full circle for a reason." Downstairs, the sounds of the festival rose like a chorus, music tuning, vendors laughing, the thud of tent poles being driven into soft soil. Charlie stepped out onto the porch and inhaled deeply, the scent of apple blossoms and kettle corn wrapping around her like a welcome home. This was it, the day she'd been working toward, the festival she had thrown her whole heart into. And now it was real. The town square had transformed overnight. What had been bare ground and chalk outlines yesterday was now a vibrant maze of colourful tents, ribbon-wrapped booths, and strings of lights waiting for dusk. The hand-painted banners Charlie had agonised over swayed gently in the morning breeze, spelling out, "Welcome to the 57th Annual Sweetbriar Apple Blossom Festival" in flowing script. By mid-morning, the square thrummed with life. Vendors called out cheerful greetings, children darted between stalls with sticky fingers and wide grins, and the pie-judging table groaned under the weight of Sweetbriar's finest family recipes. The air pulsed with bluegrass music and the rhythmic clink of mason jars filled with cider. Charlie stood beside Gracie at the head of the parade line, holding her small hand. The little girl practically vibrated with excitement, bouncing on her toes in her white dress with apple blossom accents. Gracie wore her fairy-like crown, a sash reading Blossom Bell draped diagonally across her dress. She looked like a forest princess, proud and glowing. "You ready?" Charlie asked, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. Gracie nodded solemnly, her eyes sparkling. "Let's make magic." The parade wound through Main Street like a colourful ribbon, laughter and applause trailing in its wake. Horses pulled flower-draped wagons where the high school choir sang traditional folk songs. The cheerleading squad twirled flags in synchronised patterns, and Ethan's hand-built floats, each depicting a scene from Sweetbriar's history, rolled majestically past the cheering crowds. Charlie and Gracie led the procession under a giant arch of apple blossoms, waving to familiar faces that lined the sidewalks 3 deep. Mrs. Grafton threw apple blossom petals from her spot on the courthouse steps. Mr. Halverston actually smiled, raising his cane in salute as they passed. It was the kind of moment Charlie had always thought only existed in small-town postcards and sweet fiction. And yet, it was hers. As they rounded the corner back toward the orchard, Charlie caught sight of Ethan. He stood directing the final float, looking up just as she passed. Their eyes met across the crowd, and his smile, slow and full of quiet pride, warmed her from the inside out. Back at the orchard, Ethan finished hammering in the final beam on the main stage, his shirt damp with honest work, hair tousled by the spring breeze, face flushed with pride. The sound system clicked on with perfect timing as Mayor Liz stepped up for the opening speech, the crowd gathering under fluttering banners and strings of paper lanterns. "For generations," the mayor began, her voice carrying across the orchard, "Sweetbriar has celebrated spring's renewal with this festival. Today, Thanks to fresh ideas and dedicated hearts, we're witnessing something special, a bridge between our cherished traditions and bright new possibilities. Charlie felt a flush spread across her cheeks as several knowing glances turned her way. She hadn't expected to be singled out, even indirectly. Ethan caught her eye from the side of the stage and winked, making her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with public recognition. Sweetbriar's signature cider stand was already buzzing with activity. Charlie had added her own twist, a ginger cinnamon syrup and frozen apple slices that transformed the traditional recipe into something both familiar and excitingly new. It was an instant hit. Missy gave her an approving nod as the line of customers stretched past 3 other booths. "You've got the Ellis touch," Missy said, expertly filling another jar. "Your grandmother would be mighty proud." It was all perfect. Until her phone buzzed, once, twice, then again. Charlie frowned, pulling it from her bag. The screen lit up with a name she'd been both expecting and dreading. Claire Hastings. Her stomach clenched tight as a fist. She ignored the first call, sliding the phone back into her pocket. She had promised herself, no work today, just this moment, just this festival. The real world could wait until tomorrow. But then a text came in, the notification impossible to ignore. "At the festival. Where can we talk?" Her fingers went cold. Before she could react, a sleek black sedan pulled up behind the cider booth, looking as out of place as a diamond in a cookie jar. Out stepped Claire, sleek bob perfectly styled despite the humidity, heels too high for grass, clipboard in hand and judgment in her eyes. Charlie froze, cider ladle suspended mid-pour. Claire smiled tightly, navigating the uneven ground with practiced precision. "There you are. Thought I'd see this marvel for myself. Claire, I didn't expect—" "That's clear." Claire's tone was clipped, professional. The voice Charlie had heard 1,000 times in conference rooms and client pitches. Claire's gaze swept the scene, taking in the pie contest, the cider booths, the barn dance stage with clinical assessment. "You've done a decent job. I suppose this could qualify as community engagement on a resume. But Charlie—" She lowered her voice, leaning in slightly. "What are you doing here?" Charlie opened her mouth, but no words came. How could she explain the fullness in her chest when Gracie held her hand? The quiet certainty she felt, watching Ethan build something with his hands? The way Mabel's kitchen felt more like home than her apartment ever had? Claire pressed on, relentless as always. "You could be pitching to Fortune 500s Monday morning, running your own team. Instead you're— What? Wearing vintage gingham and serving cider to farmers." A shadow shifted behind them. "Ethan." Charlie turned just as he stopped, expression unreadable. Claire followed her gaze, assessing him with a single sweep of her eyes. "And this must be the local carpenter." Charlie stiffened, feeling the words like a slap. "This is Ethan Walker." Claire extended her hand with icy politeness. "Nice to meet the reason Charlie's ghosting her future." Ethan took her hand briefly, his jaw tightening. "Excuse me?" Claire laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the festival's warmth. "Oh, come on. We all know how these things go. Small town, old flame." She turned to Charlie. "I'll give you a minute, but don't forget what we talked about. New York doesn't wait for anyone." She stepped away, heels sinking slightly in the grass, phone already back in her hand. Charlie turned to Ethan, breath tight in her chest. "That wasn't—" "You didn't correct her," he said quietly. "What?" "When she said I was the reason you were ghosting your future, you didn't say she was wrong." "I didn't have time? You didn't want to?" His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was hurt, wrapped in certainty. Charlie flinched. "That's not fair." "I told you I wouldn't ask you to stay," Ethan said, his eyes finding hers. "But I also thought maybe I didn't need to." "Ethan." He shook his head, stepping back. "Maybe she's right. Maybe this was just a vacation for you. A break from real life." The pain in his voice was worse than any shouted argument could have been. Charlie's lips parted, but nothing came. What could she say when her own heart was still divided, when the path ahead still felt shrouded in fog? Ethan turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of festival-goers who laughed and celebrated, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the perfect blue sky. And Charlie stood frozen by the cider stand, the joy of the morning evaporating like dew under a harsh sun. The sound of the festival roared around her like a distant storm, while inside, the old familiar battle raged, between what she'd built and what she'd dreamed, between her past and her present, between her head and her heart. Gracie's voice floated back to her from the parade, "Let's make magic." But magic, it seemed, was harder to hold on to than Charlie had thought. Chapter 16. Hearts in Full Bloom. The music didn't stop. The children still danced. The pies were judged, ribbons awarded, and cider flowed freely through the orchard's shaded booths. But for Charlie, the joy had dimmed like a lantern running low on oil. Ethan hadn't come back. She moved through the festival on autopilot, checking items off her clipboard, smiling at everyone who complimented her work. Yet her eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching for his tall frame among the revelers, hoping for a glimpse of those steady hands that had built half the festival structures surrounding her. Claire hovered near the cider stand for a while, talking to a few intrigued vendors with the practiced charm she reserved for potential clients. She examined everything with the cool assessment of someone mentally drafting a case study, trying to appear gracious as she gauged the spectacle. But when Charlie excused herself from answering any further questions about leveraging rural authenticity for urban marketing campaigns, Claire finally slipped away in her luxury car, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of everything Charlie had once chased. Claire left with her portfolio and polished shoes, but Charlie stayed with apple blossom petals in her hair and a town's worth of fingerprints on her heart. The afternoon stretched on like taffy, sweet but pulling thin. Charlie smiled through it all, at the kids with apple blossoms painted on their cheeks, the elderly couples holding hands on hay bale benches, the volunteers who offered her lemonade and praise. But it was all a blur, colours and sounds washing over her, while her heart sat heavy as a stone in her chest. And then Gracie found her. The little girl appeared suddenly beside the prize table, face solemn beneath her slightly crooked crown. She tugged on the hem of Charlie's sundress, her voice low and trembling. "Please don't leave us." Charlie knelt instantly, the clipboard forgotten on the ground beside her. "Oh, honey." "You make everything happy," Gracie said, her small fingers twisting together. "Uncle E doesn't laugh like that with anyone else." The simple truth in those words hit Charlie harder than any corporate presentation ever had. This wasn't about career trajectories or 5-year plans. This was about a little girl who had already lost too much, who saw clearly what the adults around her kept complicating. Charlie hugged her tightly, holding her a little too long, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and festival sugar. "I don't want to leave, sweetheart." Gracie pulled back, blinking up at her with hope blooming in her eyes. "Then don't." As if it were that simple, as if hearts didn't get tangled in fears and futures and the weight of choices unmade. "It's complicated," Charlie began. "Grown-ups always say that," Gracie replied with the unvarnished wisdom of childhood. "But it's not, really. You stay if you love people. You go if you don't." Charlie's throat tightened. "And if the people you love are in different places?" Gracie considered this with a tilt of her head. "Then you pick the ones who make your heart the happiest." She reached up to adjust her crown. "That's what my mum would say. She told me before she went to heaven." Charlie brushed a strand of hair from Gracie's forehead, her heart splitting wide open. "Your mum was very smart." "I know," Gracie said simply. Then she hugged Charlie again, fierce and quick, before darting off to join her friends at the ring toss. Charlie stood slowly, knees weak, watching her go. How had this child become so deeply woven into the fabric of her heart in just a few weeks? And how could she possibly untangle herself now? As the sun dipped below the orchard's edge, painting the sky in watercolour strokes of pink and gold, the lantern ceremony began, the festival's most cherished tradition. Paper lanterns lit the trees, casting a warm golden hue over faces turned upward in wonder. More lanterns floated in the air, flickering like fireflies as the town gathered in reverent silence. The music softened to a gentle accompaniment, strings and wooden flutes carrying ancient melodies across the twilight. Mayor Liz signaled to Charlie, who took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph, the culmination of weeks of planning, the rebirth of a tradition she'd helped restore. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of something ending. Charlie took the stage, the warm glow of lanterns illuminating her mother's dress. Her prepared notes remained forgotten in her pocket. Instead, she stood beneath the glow of 100 lights and let her heart speak. "When I left Sweetbriar Ridge," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "I thought I had to find something bigger, something brighter. I thought home was a place you outgrew." She paused, eyes sweeping the familiar faces, Ruth Grafton dabbing at her eyes, Missy with her arm around her teenage daughter, even Mr. Halverston leaning forward on his cane to hear better. "But what I've learned is that home isn't measured in square footage or success. It's measured in pie crumbs and porch swings, in who shows up when the bakery burns, in little girls with glittery crowns," her voice caught, "and in men who build everything with their bare hands, even when they're afraid." She glanced at the crowd, searching, wondering if Ethan had returned. The shadows between lanterns made it hard to tell. "Hearts don't grow smaller in small towns," she continued, stronger now. "They grow wider and deeper. Mine did." She looked down at her hands, steady now where they had trembled before. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you all to know that Sweetbriar Ridge gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. It gave me back myself." The applause swelled as she stepped down, breath unsteady, cheeks damp. And somewhere near the back, hidden among the trees, Ethan watched, every word carving into his chest like truth finally spoken. He'd slipped in late after spending hours walking the ridge trail, trying to outpace his thoughts, but Charlie's voice had drawn him back, just as it always had. Later, while helping volunteers stack chairs and fold tablecloths, Charlie heard her name called with breathless urgency. Gracie ran toward her, pigtails flying and something clutched in her hand, a piece of paper folded and slightly crumpled. "I forgot. I was supposed to give you this," she said, skidding to a stop. "But I gave it to Uncle Ethan instead." Charlie blinked, confused. "What letter?" Gracie grinned, a knowing look too wise for her years. "The one you wrote to me, remember? About love being a choice?" Charlie froze, realization washing over her like ice water. "She read it to me, but then I said she should give it to you," Gracie continued, eyes wide and earnest. "Because maybe you didn't know yet." Then she turned and darted away, disappearing into the crowd of volunteers, leaving Charlie stunned beneath the string lights. Across the square, Ethan stood frozen beneath the gazebo where couples had been taking photos all evening. The wooden structure was wrapped in twinkling lights and trailing vines, making it look like something from a storybook. In his hands, the folded note shook slightly. It wasn't long. Just a single page in Charlie's handwriting, words she'd written after their fight, after Gracie had asked for help with her feelings homework. The little girl had asked Charlie to explain how you know when love is real, and Charlie had written this to help her understand. "If I leave, it won't be because I stopped loving you. It'll be because I was too scared to believe I could stay. But I want to. I want to stay. Not just for Gracie, for us. For everything this town gave me back." And it ended with, "Tell me I'm not alone." Words meant to explain adult feelings to a child had somehow become the most honest thing Charlie had written in years. And now Ethan had read them, had seen her heart stripped bare on notebook paper. Charlie packed slowly that evening, movements mechanical as her mind raced. The warm glow of festival lights filtered through Mabel's lace curtains, casting patterned shadows across her open suitcase. She didn't know what she was doing, what her next step would be. New York loomed like a shadow, familiar but suddenly strange. She only knew she wasn't ready to walk away from Sweetbriar, but she also couldn't make someone love her out loud if they weren't ready. The lanterns were still glowing when she zipped her bag shut. The sounds of the festival had softened to a gentle hum of music and distant laughter. Final celebrations would continue well into the night, but Charlie needed space to think, to breathe, to decide. She carried her suitcase down Mabel's creaking stairs and out onto the porch. The night air carried the scent of apple blossoms and wood smoke. She paused, memorizing it all, the silhouette of the ridge against the star-filled sky, the way lamplight spilled from windows along Main Street, the distant fiddle music drifting from the orchard. With a deep breath, she started walking toward the square where her car was parked. And then she heard it. Charlie. She turned, heart stopping. Ethan was sprinting toward her across the town green, breath ragged, boots thudding against the grass. The crowd in the orchard turned at the commotion, parting for him like a wave breaking on shore. A few gasped. Someone whispered, "Finally!" He reached her, chest heaving, eyes fierce with something that looked like certainty. "You're not alone," he said, voice rough. She stared at him, stunned into silence, the handle of her suitcase slipping from her fingers. "I'm scared," he continued, louder now, not caring who heard. "I've been scared this whole time, scared that I'd fall again, that I'd love again, that I'd lose again." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and tenderness warring in his expression. "But I realized something tonight." He stepped onto the gazebo steps, voice strong and trembling all at once. "I already did lose. When I let you think I didn't care, and I'm not doing that again." A gasp rippled through the growing crowd. Someone, probably Missy, let out a whoop of encouragement. Charlie dropped her bag completely, walked forward, heart thundering against her ribs. "Ethan!" "I love you," he said, the words rushing out like water breaking through a dam. "I've loved you since you stole my apple fritter in 5th grade and dared me to dance with you under the fireworks." She laughed, tears spilling freely now. "You were so bad at dancing." "Still am," he admitted, a smile breaking through his intensity. "Good," she whispered, close enough now to see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "Then we'll learn together." Her hands found his face, thumbs brushing against the stubble on his jaw. "And you always said I'd never come back to Sweetbriar." "You proved me wrong," he whispered, arms circling her waist. "Turns out I just needed the right reason," she answered, rising onto her toes. And then, beneath the lanterns and before the entire town of Sweetbriar Ridge, Charlie Ellis kissed Ethan Walker like she was finally coming home after a long, long journey. The crowd erupted, cheers and applause, Gracie shouting, "Finally!" from somewhere nearby, and Mabel dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with apple blossoms. Ethan's arms wrapped around Charlie's waist, lifting her slightly off the ground as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, despite the audience. "What about New York?" he whispered, still afraid to hope. Charlie smiled, her hand resting against his cheek. "New York will still be there, but this, you and me, this town, that little girl, this is where I belong." "You sure?" "For the first time in a very long time," she said. "Yes." It wasn't a fairy tale with perfect answers and magical solutions. It was something better. It was real, messy and uncertain and full of possibility. And it was just beginning. They never called it happily ever after. They just called it Saturday morning, with coffee and apples and home. Chapter 17. Bloom, where you're planted. The early summer breeze danced through the wide-open barn doors, carrying the scent of fresh paint and possibility. Charlie stood in the centre of what had once been the Walker family's storage barn, now transformed into Sweetbriar's newest event venue. Sunlight streamed through the newly installed skylights, illuminating floating dust motes and the honey-coloured wood of the restored floor. 1 month since the festival. 1 month since she'd chosen to stay. 1 month of waking up certain. "What do you think about hanging the chandeliers over there?" Charlie asked, pointing toward the rafters Ethan had reinforced last week. Ethan looked up from where he was installing the last of the reclaimed wood wainscoting, a pencil tucked behind his ear and sawdust clinging to his faded t-shirt. His eyes followed her gesture, then crinkled at the corners as he smiled. Perfect spot. The light will catch them just right during sunset weddings. Charlie nodded, making a note on her tablet. Sweetbriar Gatherings, her new business venture, was taking shape faster than she'd dared hope. Already they had bookings for 3 summer weddings, a Harvest Festival meeting space, and Ruth Grafton's legendary Quilting Circle retreat. It turned out that event planning in a small town wasn't so different from coordinating marketing campaigns in the city, just more personal, more meaningful, and infinitely more satisfying. "Uncle E, Auntie Charlie, come see what I did." Gracie's voice echoed from the small anteroom they'd converted into a welcome space. They exchanged a glance, Charlie's heart warming at the name that had become official since the festival. Auntie Charlie. 2 simple words that meant everything. They found Gracie standing proudly before the far wall, paintbrush in hand, her overalls splattered with a rainbow of colours. Behind her spread a mural that took Charlie's breath away. Apple trees in full bloom, lanterns hanging from branches, and tiny figures dancing beneath them. Simple but magical, rendered with the earnest talent of a child who painted what she loved. "My art teacher said I should paint what makes me happy," Gracie explained, twirling the brush between her fingers. "So I painted the festival. And us." Charlie knelt beside her, throat tight with emotion. There they were, 3 small figures beneath the largest tree, holding hands. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered. Ethan crouched on Gracie's other side, his arms slipping naturally around Charlie's waist. "Best welcome wall any barn ever had." Gracie beamed, then suddenly remembered something important. "Aunt Mabel said to tell you the tables are all set up outside, and that you both need to change before people start arriving." "The garden party?" Charlie glanced at her watch and gasped. "We lost track of time. The soft launch starts in an hour." Ethan laughed, standing and pulling Charlie to her feet. "Some event planner you are," she swatted his arm playfully. "Some contractor you are. We still have trim missing in the bathroom." "Details," he said, stealing a quick kiss that tasted of coffee and sawdust. Gracie made a theatrical gagging sound. "You guys are so mushy." "Get used to it, kiddo," Ethan told her, ruffling her hair before she darted away to clean her paintbrushes. Later, as Charlie slipped into a sundress in Mabel's guest room, now officially her room, at least until she and Ethan figured out their next step, her phone buzzed on the dresser. A message from Claire. Charlie hesitated, then opened it. "Janssen account went to Meridian. Board says your rural marketing presentation could have saved it. Still time to come back. Corner office waiting. Last chance, Charlie." A month ago, those words would have sent her into a spiral of doubt and regret. Now, she simply felt a gentle release, like setting down a heavy suitcase she'd been carrying too long. She deleted the message without replying. Some chapters needed to close quietly. Mabel had transformed the orchard's east lawn into something from a magazine spread. White tables dotted the grass, each adorned with mason jars filled with wildflowers. String lights crisscrossed overhead, waiting for dusk to transform them into stars. Local businesses had set up sample stations, Missy's miniature pies, Roy's hand-carved candle holders, and Mrs. Grafton's lavender sachets, arranged artfully for guests to appreciate. This wasn't just the launch of Charlie's business, it was a celebration of Sweetbriar itself, of what happened when people built things together. "There you are," Ethan said, approaching with 2 glasses of cider. He'd changed into a blue button-down that made his eyes look like summer sky, sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. "Hiding from your own party?" Charlie accepted the glass gratefully, just taking it all in. The lawn had filled with townspeople and curious visitors from neighbouring communities. Mayor Liz was already talking up the venue to a couple clearly planning a wedding. Gracie darted between groups, proudly showing photos of her mural on Mabel's tablet. "I have something for you," Ethan said, suddenly looking nervous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Charlie's breath caught. "It's not I mean, not yet, he stammered, then laughed at himself. Just open it. Inside wasn't a ring, but a delicate golden pin shaped like an apple blossom. Turn it over, he said softly. Engraved on the back were the words, Charlotte Ellis, Visionary, the Metropolitan Marketing Excellence Award. Charlie looked up, confused. Your boss, well, your ex-boss, sent it here last week with a note saying regardless of your decision, you'd earned this. They announced the winners the day after the festival. His eyes shone with pride. You did it, Charlie, you won. She stared at the pin, emotions tangling in her chest. But the campaign, the pitch. Turns out they judged on past work, not just the final presentation, and yours spoke for itself. He took her hands in his. I kept it until now because I wanted you to see you didn't need it to prove you're brilliant. You already knew that. We all did. Charlie closed the box gently, then slipped it into her pocket. A token from a life that felt increasingly distant, increasingly like someone else's dream. Thank you, she said, reaching up to touch his face, for knowing when to hold things back and when to let them go. As twilight settled over the orchard, Mabel's ancient record player crackled to life. The same vinyl that had played at every Sweetbriar gathering for 3 decades filled the air with gentle music. Couples drifted toward the makeshift dance floor, a simple wooden platform Ethan had built beneath the oldest apple tree. Charlie slipped off her sandals, feeling the cool grass between her toes. Ethan appeared beside her, extending his hand with exaggerated formality. Still a terrible dancer, he warned as he led her to the floor. Some things don't change. And some things do, she replied, stepping into his arms. They swayed beneath the string lights, Charlie's head resting against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, steady and sure, like everything he built. Around them, Sweetbriar continued its gentle evening rhythm. Mr. Halverston grudgingly complimented the barn's craftsmanship. Missy and Roy slow danced nearby, decades of marriage in their synchronized steps. Mabel watched it all from her chair, the satisfaction of a woman who'd always known how the story would end. And Gracie, sweet, perceptive Gracie, sat on the edge of the platform, legs swinging, watching Charlie and Ethan with unabashed joy. Look at us, Charlie murmured against Ethan's shoulder. Who would have thought? I did, he said simply. Always. The music swelled, and Charlie closed her eyes, letting the moment imprint itself on her heart. The smell of apple trees, the warmth of Ethan's hand against the small of her back, the sound of laughter drifting across a lawn she now called home. Charlie gazed out at the orchard, bathed in the golden hour light. Looks different than the day I arrived. Ethan followed her gaze, then looked back at her with tenderness in his eyes. You look different than the day you arrived, she smiled, remembering the woman who'd driven into town with a designer suitcase and a 5-year plan. Good. This is the life I didn't know I wanted, she whispered. But now I can't imagine wanting anything else. Ethan's arms tightened around her, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Charlie knew. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a much better one. Chapter 18. The Wedding at Sweetbriar Ridge. The orchard had never looked more beautiful. Apple blossoms drifted down from branches in soft pink flurries, dancing on the gentle breeze before settling on the emerald grass like nature's own confetti. Lanterns swayed between the trees, glowing gold against the dusky blue sky that promised a perfect spring evening. Rows of wooden chairs, each one handcrafted by Ethan during the winter months, curved between the apple trees, creating an aisle that seemed to have grown naturally from the earth itself. Wildflowers and lantern-lit mason jars lined the path, casting a warm, honeyed light that made everything feel wrapped in magic. The entire town had turned out. Mrs. Grafton handed out her specially embroidered handkerchiefs with apple blossoms and the date. Mr. Halverston had not only shown up, but had polished his shoes and trimmed his moustache for the occasion. Missy fluttered between guests, making sure everyone had cider before the ceremony began. Even Claire had acknowledged the day in her own way, sending a silver frame with a note that read simply, "Some stories need their proper endings. Congratulations on finding yours." And at the end of the aisle, beneath a handmade arbor wrapped in ivy and blossoms, Ethan waited. His hands were steady. His jaw was not. "Stop fidgeting," Max whispered, adjusting Ethan's boutonniere. "You're making me nervous." "Can't help it," Ethan murmured, eyes fixed on the orchard entrance. He wore a simple charcoal suit with a tie the exact shade of apple blossoms, clothes that let him be exactly who he was, the man who had built this place with his hands and had waited for this day with his whole heart. Then the music began. Soft acoustic guitar, a sweet rendition of You Are My Home played by Roy's son, who had returned from Nashville for the occasion. The gathered crowd turned as one, a collective intake of breath that seemed to make the orchard itself pause in anticipation. Gracie appeared first, crown of blossoms nestled in her dark curls, scattering pink petals from a small basket Ethan had carved for her. Her dress sparkled in the late afternoon light, layers of tulle making her look like a woodland fairy. Her face glowed with the solemn pride of a child who understands she is part of something momentous. She walked carefully, her eyes sweeping the crowd until they found Ethan's. She smiled like the sun breaking through clouds. "You look beautiful, Gracie girl," Ethan mouthed. She nodded as if to say, "I know." Then came Charlie. She moved like she belonged there, graceful, radiant, sure. Her dress was simple, vintage lace and soft tulle that caught the breeze, the hem kissed with hand-sewn embroidery that Mabel had worked on through winter evenings. Her bouquet was made of orchard wildflowers tied with a faded blue ribbon from her childhood dance costume, something old, something blue, something that connected past and present. Ethan's breath caught. His eyes glistened with tears he didn't try to hide. His lips parted slightly, and when she reached him, he took her hands as if he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment, which, in many ways, he had been. "You okay?" she whispered, her own eyes bright. "I'm gonna lose it," he whispered back. Charlie squeezed his hands. "Then lose it. You're allowed." Mayor Liz, who had gotten certified specifically for this occasion, smiled at them both before addressing the gathered town. Her words about community and second chances floated through the orchard, but Ethan barely heard them. He was too busy memorizing every detail of Charlie's face, the way light caught in her eyes, the small smile that played at her lips, the single curl that had escaped to brush against her cheek. Their vows were handwritten, spoken beneath the boughs of the tree they had carved their initials into as teenagers, a carving that had weathered and aged but never disappeared, much like their connection to each other. Charlie's voice trembled only once. "You were my first real home, and the place I returned to when I didn't know I needed one. I promise to love you in every season, through the blossoms and the harvests, through the winters and the new growth. And to never run from what we can build together. You and me and Gracie. We're not just a family we're creating. We're a family that was waiting to be found." Ethan's voice cracked as he took her hands in his. "You came home and brought me back to life. You made my niece laugh again. You made the walls I built feel unnecessary and small. And today I promise I'll never stop choosing you. Not for a second, not when things get hard, not when we disagree about paint colors or festival budgets or whose turn it is to make coffee. Every morning, every night, and all the moments in between, I choose you, Charlie. I always have." There wasn't a dry eye in the orchard. Mabel dabbed at her cheeks with a handkerchief while Mayor Liz blinked furiously behind her sunglasses. Missy openly sobbed into Roy's shoulder, and Mr. Halverston cleared his throat suspiciously often. Gracie stood beside Charlie, holding the rings on a small pillow she'd insisted on making herself. When the moment came, she handed them over with such reverence that Charlie had to bite her lip to keep from breaking down completely. The bands were simple. Ethan's burnished gold, Charlie's inlaid with tiny apple blossoms. As they slipped them onto each other's fingers, the setting sun caught the metal, sending a flash of light between them like a promise made visible. When Mayor Liz finally pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that erupted wasn't polite or restrained. It was thunderous, a release of joy that had been building in Sweetbriar Ridge since the moment Charlie's car had broken down and brought her back where she belonged. Ethan cupped Charlie's face and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. When they broke apart, laughing and breathless, Gracie threw her arms around them both, and for a moment they stood there as a family, wrapped in each other and in the love of an entire town. The reception began as twilight deepened. Long tables had been set up near the barn, now Sweetbriar gatherings, draped with twinkling lights and decorated with mismatched china and centerpieces of apple branches. The feast was a community effort. Mrs. Grafton's apple pie, Missy's honey-glazed ham, dishes contributed by every family in Sweetbriar, each labelled with names and good wishes. The barn doors stood wide open, transformed into a dance floor where the band played beneath a canopy of fairy lights. Laughter spilled across the orchard like music of its own, rising and falling in the rhythms of people who had known each other forever, and the woman who had finally come home to them. Charlie and Ethan's first dance was under the stars, barefoot, her dress hem brushing the grass, his hands steady at her waist. They moved with the easy grace of two people who had found their rhythm, surrounded by flickering lanterns and the faces of everyone who mattered. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything important had already been said, or would be said in the thousands of ordinary days stretching before them. Gracie cut in halfway through, tugging at Ethan's sleeve with determined insistence. Without missing a beat, he lifted her with one arm, still holding Charlie with the other, and they danced as a trio while the town clapped along. "We're a real family now," Gracie announced. "Forever and ever." "We already were, sweetheart," Charlie told her, smoothing back a curl. "The wedding just makes it official." "Like adoption papers," Gracie nodded sagely. "But prettier." Ethan laughed, the sound rich and full. "Exactly like that?" Mabel found them later with cider glasses and a kiss on each cheek. "That was magic," she declared. "But don't you dare make me babysit during the honeymoon. I'm too old to chase after that one." She nodded toward Gracie, who was teaching younger children dance moves in the middle of the floor. Charlie grinned. "Only if you want to." "I absolutely do," Mabel admitted with a wink. "But I still want the option to say no. That's what grandmothers are for, spoiling and then sending home." "You've been practicing for this role your whole life," Ethan teased. Mabel swatted his arm, but her smile was tender. "You two deserve every bit of this happiness. Your grandmother would be so proud, Charlie. And your parents, Ethan. They'd be over the moon." For a moment they stood in silence, acknowledging those who should have been there. Then Mabel straightened her shoulders and lifted her glass. "To those who brought us together," she said softly. "And to the future you're building." Later, when many guests had drifted home and Gracie had fallen asleep on a nest of blankets with other exhausted children, Charlie and Ethan slipped away from the lights and lingering celebration. Hand in hand, they wandered back into the orchard where it had all begun. The moon hung low and full, bathing the trees in silver light. Petals still occasionally drifted down, landing on their shoulders. The music from the barn was distant now, just a faint melody carried on the night breeze. Charlie leaned into Ethan's chest, her arms wrapped around his waist. Her wedding dress glowed in the moonlight, his jacket draped around her shoulders against the spring chill. "I think we did it," she said softly. "Did what?" he murmured into her hair. "Everything. Found our way back to each other. Built something real. Made a family." She looked up at him, her face wondering. "I think we really did it." "You think?" he teased gently. "I know," she said, smiling with absolute certainty. He kissed her then, soft and slow beneath the same tree where their initials had quietly waited for them to find their way back. When they broke apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching. Then, together, they whispered into the quiet night. This is just our beginning. And the orchard, witness to their journey from first love to lasting commitment, held them close as they stepped into forever. A forever built on choice, on courage, on coming home, and on the certain knowledge that the best stories don't end with happily ever after. They begin there,